The worn, checkered tablecloths of Trattoria di Valerio had absorbed 1,000 stories. They held the ghosts of spilled Chianti from wedding toasts, the faint smudges of flour from a chef's celebratory gesture, and the nearly invisible tear stains from whispered confessions over late-night tiramisu. The restaurant was a relic, a pocket of old-world stillness tucked away on a bustling Chicago street where glass and steel towers clawed at the sky. It smelled of garlic, simmering tomatoes, and something deeper, the comforting scent of continuity. Isabella Rossi, known to everyone as Bella, was as much a part of the trattoria as the faded photographs of Italian movie stars on the walls. At 24, she moved with a grace that belied the exhaustion settled deep in her bones. Her dark hair was always tied back in a simple, practical knot, and her smile, though genuine, rarely reached the weary depths of her brown eyes. Bella wasn't just a waitress, she was an anchor. She'd been working here since she was 16, first as a favor to old Mr. Valerio, and now as a necessity. Since her parents' car had been stolen by a patch of black ice on the I-90 2 years ago, she was all her younger brother, Leo, had. Every tip, every extra shift, went into a worn envelope marked Leo's College Fund, a dream she guarded more fiercely than her own. Her life was a rhythm of repetition, a comforting and sometimes suffocating loop. And a fixed point in that loop, every morning at 7 a.m. sharp and every evening at 6 p.m., was Mr. Alistair Finch. He occupied the corner booth, the one with the slightly torn leather seat that offered a commanding view of the entire dining room and the street outside. Mr. Finch was a man carved from quietude. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the color of a winter sky. He never wore flashy suits or heavy gold rings. His attire was consistently simple, a tailored charcoal grey suit, a crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked more like a retired professor of classics than the man who held the city's underworld in the palm of his hand. No one at the trattoria knew his business, and no one asked. They only knew he was a man of unshakable routine. He would arrive, place his worn leather-bound copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations on the table, and wait. Bella was the only one he ever allowed to serve him. "The usual, Mr. Finch," she would ask, though the question was a mere formality, a small ritual they both enjoyed. "If you would be so kind, Isabella," he would reply, his voice a low, gravelly hum that never rose above a conversational tone. His usual was an espresso, black, no sugar, served in a tiny porcelain cup. He would read his book, take precise measured sips of his coffee, and watch. His gaze was not intrusive, but it was total. He saw everything: the young couple on their first date, fumbling with their napkins, the family celebrating a birthday, their laughter echoing off the plaster walls. The stressed manager, Marco, running a hand through his thinning hair. He saw the life of the trattoria unfold, a silent, unmoving sentinel in his corner booth. For Bella, his presence was a strange comfort. He never engaged in small talk, never asked about her life, but there was an understanding that flowed between them in the quiet moments. The way he would subtly nod his thanks, the way his eyes would soften for a fraction of a second when she managed a tired but real smile. He once left a $500 tip on a $3 coffee bill tucked under his saucer. When she tried to return it, flustered, he had simply held up a hand and said, "For the boys' books, a mind is a terrible thing to waste." He knew about Leo. He knew without her ever having told him. After that, she understood that Mr. Finch's silence was not one of indifference, but of profound observation. He was a part of her routine, a quiet pillar in the often chaotic world of her life, and she valued his steadfast presence more than she could ever say. On a Tuesday night in late October, the wind howling off Lake Michigan rattled the trattoria's front windows, and the rhythm of Bella's life was about to be shattered. The disruption arrived in a blast of cold air and expensive cologne, a party of four led by a man who seemed to take up more space than his physical form required. His name was Richard Sterling, a fact he made sure everyone in his vicinity knew within minutes. He was new money, loud and shiny, a tech bro who had just closed a massive deal and was determined to celebrate by conquering this quaint little Italian joint he'd read about in some magazine. He wore a designer suit that was a size too tight, strangling his fleshy neck, and a gold watch so large it looked like a weapon. His face was flushed with alcohol and self-importance, and his voice sliced through the restaurant's warm hum like a shard of glass. "A table for 4, he boomed, not asking but demanding. "And make it the best one you've got. We're celebrating success tonight." His companions, 2 men and a woman who looked bored and brittle, snickered behind him. Marco, the manager, scurried over, his professional smile plastered on his face. "Of course, sir. Right this way." Bella watched from across the room, a familiar knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She knew this type. They saw the world as their personal playground and service staff, as the disposable toys within it. They were a storm of entitlement, and she was about to be in the direct path of the tempest. They were seated in the center of the dining room, a stage for their performance. From his corner booth, Mr. Finch turned a page of his book, his expression unchanged, but his eyes, cold and still, were no longer on the text. They were fixed on the new arrivals. The onslaught began immediately. The wine list was sneered at. "You call this a selection? Get me your most expensive bottle of Barolo, and don't take all night about it." The bread wasn't warm enough. The olive oil wasn't fruity enough. Each complaint was delivered with a dismissive wave of the hand, a theatrical sigh designed to broadcast his superiority. Bella was assigned their table. She approached with her shoulders squared, her waitress smile firmly in place. A mask of polite deference she had perfected over years of practice. "Good evening, my name is Bella. Can I start you with some appetizers?" Richard Sterling's eyes roamed over her, a slow, appraising look that made her skin crawl. "Bella, huh? Cute. All right, Bella, let's see if you can keep up." For the next hour, Bella was subjected to a masterclass in humiliation. Sterling snapped his fingers to get her attention. He sent back his steak twice, claiming it was overcooked the first time and undercooked the second, though it looked identical to her. He made loud, pointed comments to his friends about the quality of the service, just loud enough for her and the surrounding tables to hear. "You'd think for these prices they could hire staff with a brain," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. Bella's smile never wavered, but inside a cold fury was building. She thought of Leo, of the physics textbook he needed, of the rent that was due next week. She swallowed her pride, refilled their water glasses, and cleared their plates with quiet efficiency. Each trip to the table felt like walking into a cage with a preening, unpredictable animal. The other diners shifted uncomfortably. The joyous laughter from the birthday party had quieted. The first-date couple was staring at their plates. The entire restaurant was being held hostage by one man's ego. And in the corner, Mr. Finch sat, utterly still. He hadn't ordered anything else. His empty espresso cup sat before him. He was no longer pretending to read. He was simply watching, his face a mask of placid neutrality. But Bella, who knew the subtle landscape of his expressions, saw something in the hard set of his jaw, a tension in his shoulders that wasn't there an hour ago. He was a coiled spring, a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. The breaking point came with dessert. Sterling, now significantly drunker, was loudly recounting a story about a corporate takeover, his voice slurring. As Bella placed a delicate slice of tiramisu in front of him, he gesticulated wildly with his arm, knocking his full glass of red wine directly onto her white apron and the front of her uniform. The dark red liquid bloomed across the fabric like a wound. The cold shock of it made her gasp. "Clumsy bitch," Sterling roared, jumping to his feet. "Look what you did. This is a $2,000 suit. You think you can afford to replace this?" His friends laughed. The woman with the brittle smile simply smirked into her wine glass. I'm so sorry, sir," Bella stammered, her face burning with shame and anger. "It was an accident." "An accident?" he sneered, his face inches from hers. His breath was sour with wine and malice. "The only accident here is your employment. You're nothing but a clumsy minimum-wage waitress. What, did you drop out of high school to pursue this glamorous career?" The insult, so personal and cruel, struck her harder than a physical blow. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and sudden. She fought them back, clenching her fists at her sides. "Sir, please lower your voice," she whispered, her own voice trembling. And then he crossed the line. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into her skin. "Don't you tell me what to do. You work for me tonight. You are here to serve me. Do you understand that, sweetheart?" The restaurant fell into a dead, ringing silence. The clinking of cutlery stopped. Every eye was on them. Bella stood frozen, trapped in his grip, the world narrowing to the pressure on her wrist and the hateful leer on his face. Marco, the manager, started to move forward, then stopped, his face pale and indecisive, clearly terrified of the belligerent customer. No one moved. No one spoke. It felt like an eternity. And then, from the corner of the room, came a soft, almost imperceptible sound. It was the sound of a leather-bound book being closed. Slowly, deliberately, Mr. Alistair Finch placed his copy of Meditations on the table. He folded his hands over it for a moment, as if in prayer. Then, with an unnerving lack of haste, he pushed his chair back. The scrape of its legs against the wooden floor was the only sound in the cavernous silence. He stood up. He wasn't a large man, but his presence suddenly filled the room, sucking the air out of it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move quickly. He simply began to walk toward the center table, his steps measured and even, his charcoal suit seeming to absorb the light around him. Richard Sterling, still clutching Bella's wrist, turned to see who had interrupted his performance. He saw an old man in a simple suit, and his drunken arrogance surged. "What do you want, Grandpa? You want an autograph?" Mr. Finch didn't stop until he was standing beside their table. He didn't look at Sterling. His gaze, calm and as cold as the bottom of a lake, was fixed on the point where Sterling's thick fingers were digging into Bella's arm. "Let the young lady go," Mr. Finch said. His voice was not a request. It was a statement of fact, as if he were announcing the time of day. It was quiet, yet it carried over the silence and seemed to vibrate in the very air. Sterling laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Or what? You gonna hit me with your walker? Mind your own damn business. This doesn't concern you." Mr. Finch finally lifted his eyes to meet Sterling's. It was a mistake Sterling would replay in his nightmares for years to come. There was no anger in Finch's eyes. There was no emotion at all. It was the flat, dead calm gaze of a predator that has already decided the fate of its prey. It was the look of a man who had seen and done things Sterling's pampered mind could not begin to comprehend. "You are a guest in this establishment," Mr. Finch said, his voice still unnervingly level, "and your welcome has expired. Release her, pay your bill, and leave." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Sterling's face. The absolute certainty in the old man's voice was more intimidating than any shouted threat. But his ego, buoyed by alcohol, wouldn't let him back down in front of his friends. "I'll leave when I'm good and ready," he sneered, tightening his grip on Bella. She winced in pain. Mr. Finch's expression did not change, but a subtle shift occurred. It was as if a final internal switch had been flipped. He took one more step forward, closing the small distance between them. He reached out, not with aggression, but with a slow, deliberate motion, and placed his hand on Sterling's shoulder. His touch was light, almost gentle, but through the fabric of the expensive suit, Sterling felt it. It wasn't the grip of an old man. It was a grip of forged steel, of immense, barely restrained power. He felt the strength in those fingers, a latent violence that promised to shatter his collarbone with the slightest pressure. The drunken haze in his mind evaporated, replaced by a sudden cold spike of primal fear. He was looking at a man who could end him, right here, and not even breathe heavily afterward. Mr. Finch leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only Sterling could hear. "I am not going to ask you again." The threat was unspoken, but it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sterling's bravado crumbled into dust. His hand flew open as if he'd been burned, releasing Bella's wrist. She stumbled back, cradling her arm, a dark red imprint already forming on her skin. Sterling stared at Mr. Finch, his mouth hanging open, his face a mask of confusion and terror. He looked at his friends for support, but they were staring at their plates, refusing to meet his eyes. They had felt the shift in the room, too. The performance was over. "Bill," Sterling croaked at Bella, unable to look at her. She nodded, still shaken, and hurried to get the check. Mr. Finch removed his hand from Sterling's shoulder, but remained standing there, a silent, immovable statue. Until Bella returned. Sterling fumbled with his wallet, his hands trembling so badly he dropped his credit card on the floor. He didn't dare bend to pick it up. One of his friends did it for him. He signed the slip with a shaky, illegible scrawl, threw the pen on the table, and scrambled to his feet. Without another word, without a backward glance, Richard Sterling and his entourage practically fled the restaurant, pushing past the hostess stand and bursting out into the cold night air. The door swung shut behind them, and the silence they left in their wake was profound. The tension in the Trattoria di Valerio finally broke. A collective shaky breath was released. The other diners began to murmur, casting glances between Bella, who stood trembling by the table, and Mr. Finch, who had not moved. He turned his attention to Bella. His eyes, which had been so terrifyingly cold moments before, were now filled with a quiet concern. "Are you all right, Isabella?" he asked, his voice returning to its normal low timbre. He used her full name, a sign of respect he reserved only for her. The dam of her composure finally burst. Tears welled up and streamed down her cheeks, tears of relief, of humiliation, of a strange and overwhelming gratitude. She could only nod, unable to speak, pressing a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Mr. Finch reached into his suit jacket and produced a pristine white linen handkerchief, folded into a perfect square. He offered it to her. She took it with a trembling hand. "Go to the back," he said gently. "Take a moment. Marco will handle this." He glanced at the manager, who was now hovering nearby, looking utterly useless. Marco jumped as if zapped with electricity. Yes, of course, Mr. Finch. Bella, go, take a break. I'm so sorry." Bella retreated toward the warmth and clatter of the kitchen, clutching the soft linen handkerchief. The clean scent of it, a small comfort in the chaos of her emotions. Mr. Finch walked back to his corner booth as if nothing had happened. He sat down, picked up his book, and found his page. To any casual observer, he was once again just a quiet old man reading in a restaurant. But no one in the trattoria that night was a casual observer anymore. They had seen the steel beneath the calm exterior. They had felt the weight of his authority. He signaled for his own check. Another waiter, a young man named David, scurried over, almost tripping in his haste. "On the house tonight, Mr. Finch," David stammered. "Everything. Marco insists." Mr. Finch looked up from his book. "That's very kind, but I always pay my way." He placed a crisp $100 bill on the table, more than enough to cover his single espresso. "See that Isabella gets the change, and tell her she has done more than enough for one night. She should go home to her brother." He stood, tucked his book under his arm, and walked to the door. As he left, the entire dining room watched him go, a silent, unified wave of awe and respect following him out into the windy Chicago night. He had restored order not with a roar, but with a whisper. And everyone there knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that the night's events were not yet over. The bill Richard Sterling had paid inside was just the beginning. The real price was yet to be collected. The cold night air did little to cool the rage simmering in Richard Sterling's blood. He stumbled out of the trattoria, his friends trailing behind him like nervous pilot fish. The fear he'd felt inside had curdled into a foul, impotent fury. Humiliation was an alien feeling to him, and it tasted like ash in his mouth. "Who the hell was that old fossil?" he spat, fumbling for the keys to his car. "Some washed up has been. I should have laid him out right there." "Rich, just let it go," one of his friends, a man named Kevin, said nervously. "The guy had a weird vibe. Let's just get out of here." "Let it go? No way. I'm going to find out who he is. I'm going to ruin him. And that little waitress, I'll have her job by morning. I'll sue the restaurant for harassment." His words were a blustering attempt to reclaim the dominance he'd so swiftly lost. He finally located the key fob and unlocked his prized possession. A brand-new Porsche 911 Turbo S, painted in a vibrant, almost obnoxious guard's red. It was a monument to his success, a six-figure declaration of his importance. He loved the car more than any person he knew. Sliding into the supple leather driver's seat was his therapy, the roar of the engine, his validation. He jabbed the ignition button, and the engine snarled to life, a comforting sound in the unsettling quiet of the parking lot. He was about to peel out, to leave this embarrassing episode behind in a cloud of exhaust, when a pair of headlights flared to life behind him. A moment later, a large, dark, and utterly nondescript sedan, A Lincoln town car, old but impeccably maintained, pulled up at an angle, perfectly blocking him in. The Lincoln's engine cut out. Two doors of the sedan opened simultaneously. From the driver's side emerged a man who seemed to be built entirely of rectangles. A blocky head on a thick neck, a wide torso, and powerful, heavy limbs. From the passenger side, another man, leaner but with the coiled tension of a whip, stepped out. They moved with a silent, synchronized purpose that spoke of long and violent practice. Sterling's bravado flickered and died. The rear door of the Lincoln opened, and Mr. Alastair Finch stepped out. Under the harsh orange sodium lights, the scholarly aura he projected in the trattoria was gone. Out here, he was a wraith, a figure of judgment. Mr. Finch walked slowly toward the Porsche, his expensive but understated leather shoes making soft sounds on the cracked asphalt. Sterling, trapped, fumbled for his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he yelled, his voice cracking. Mr. Finch smiled, a thin, bloodless expression that held no warmth. "By all means, please do. Tell them Richard Sterling is being accosted. Give them the license plate of your fine automobile. It will make the paperwork much tidier for them later." The calm certainty froze Sterling's hand. Mr. Finch began to walk a slow circle around the Porsche. "A beautiful machine," he said, his voice conversational. "A status symbol. But a machine has no soul. It is simply a tool. And tools, Mr. Sterling, can be replaced." He continued his circuit. "You see, I am a man who appreciates character. That restaurant has character. The people inside it, they are part of that character. That young woman, Isabella," he said, the name spoken with a strange reverence. "She is the heart of that place. I have watched her for years. I watched her grieve. I watch her now, working to give her brother a life she never had. She is a small, quiet, constant piece of decency in my life." He turned his gaze back to Sterling, and the coldness in his eyes was absolute. "She is, in her own simple, unassuming way, a part of my life, a part of my routine, a part of the order I value." He paused, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the leaner of his two men, a man named Dante. Dante walked to the trunk of the Lincoln and pulled out a red metal can. Gasoline. Sterling's eyes widened in horror. No, wait, this is a $200,000 car, please." Dante began to pour the liquid over the hood, the windshield, the roof of the gleaming red car. "Please, I'm sorry," Sterling shrieked, muffled by the glass. "I'll pay. I'll apologize to her. How much do you want? Name a price." Mr. Finch watched, his expression unreadable. "Your problem, Mr. Sterling, is that you believe everything has a price. Tonight, you are going to learn a very important lesson in economics. Some debts are not paid with money." He pulled out an old silver Zippo lighter, its surface worn smooth with time. With a practiced flick of his thumb, he sparked it to life. The small, steady flame danced in the darkness. He looked Sterling dead in the eye, his voice a final, chilling whisper that seemed to cut through the glass. "You just touched my life." And with a simple, fluid motion, he tossed the lit Zippo onto the hood of the car. With a deafening whoosh, the world erupted in fire. A ball of orange and yellow flame engulfed the Porsche, roaring into the night sky. The heat was instantaneous and intense. Inside his leather and steel cocoon, Richard Sterling screamed, a high, thin sound of pure terror. Just as the flames began to lick at the interior, the passenger door was wrenched open by Leo, the larger of Finch's men. He hauled Sterling out of the inferno with contemptuous ease and threw him onto the asphalt. Sterling lay there, coughing and sobbing, his face smeared with soot, his hair singed. He stared, mesmerized and horrified, at the blazing pyre that had once been his car. It was a twisted, blackened skeleton, a monument to his arrogance being consumed by righteous fire. Mr. Finch watched the flames for another moment, his face illuminated by the destructive glow. He seemed satisfied. He turned, got back into the Lincoln, and was followed by his two silent associates. The car drove away into the night, leaving Sterling alone with the roaring, crackling remains of his life's proudest achievement. The lesson had been delivered, but for Richard Sterling, the lesson was only just beginning. By the next morning, he stormed into his glass-walled corner office, the smell of smoke a phantom clinging to his skin. The terror of the night had been burned away by the harsh light of day, leaving behind only the pure, distilled fuel of his rage. He would not be broken. He would annihilate them. The restaurant, the waitress, the old man. They would be craters by the time he was done. He barked orders at his assistant. "Get my lawyer on the line and Marcus Thorne, now." He paced his office, a caged tiger admiring his own stripes in the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. This was his kingdom. No one could touch him here. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thorne on line 1. He specifically asked for it to be on speaker." Sterling smirked. Marcus probably wanted to offer his personal congratulations on the acquisition. "Perfect." He jabbed the button. "Marcus, good to hear from you. Big night last night. We're moving forward on the integration plan today." The voice that came through the speaker was not congratulatory. It was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Richard, there is no integration plan. The deal is off." The silence in the office was absolute. Sterling's smirk froze, then melted from his face. His assistant, pretending to organize files, went completely still. "What? What are you talking about, Marcus? The papers are signed. We're locked in." "The papers contain a character and conduct clause, Richard, a clause you violated so spectacularly last night that our board convened at dawn. We're invoking it. The acquisition is terminated, effective immediately." Sterling's face turned a blotchy red. "Character clause? For what? Having a celebratory dinner?" "For assaulting a member of the public, Richard," Thorne's voice sliced back, each word a perfectly sharpened blade. "For creating a scene so vile that multiple patrons, some of whom, by sheer coincidence, are clients of ours, felt compelled to call me personally to report it. You didn't just have dinner, Richard. You showed the world exactly who you are. And who you are is a liability this company will not carry. We're done." "You can't do this," Sterling shrieked, his voice breaking, his composure shattering in front of his staff. "This is my deal. I built this. You built a house of cards on an unstable foundation of ego, and last night you pulled one out from the bottom. Goodbye, Richard." The line went dead, leaving an echoing silence in its wake. Sterling stared at the phone, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury. His kingdom was crumbling. Before he could even process the cataclysm, his office door opened. It was Kevin, his friend from the night before. He looked different today. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by a calm, almost pitying demeanor. "Get out," Sterling snarled. "I don't think so, Rich," Kevin said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk. About last night. About the deal." "There is no deal," Sterling roared, sweeping a stack of papers off his desk. "There never was," Kevin said quietly. Sterling froze. "What did you say?" "The deal, Rich. The big acquisition. It was never going to happen." Kevin walked further into the room, his expression unreadable. "Marcus and the board. They've wanted you out for months. Your recklessness, your arrogance. You were a cancer in the company, but you were tied in so tight they couldn't just fire you. They needed a reason. A big, public, undeniable reason." A cold dread, far deeper than the fear he'd felt in the parking lot, began to seep into Sterling's bones. He sank into his chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "They built the deal for you," Kevin continued, his voice relentless. "A golden calf for you to worship. They knew you wouldn't be able to resist celebrating it, that you'd have to make a spectacle of yourself. They just needed to make sure you did it in the right place." "You," Sterling whispered, the realization dawning in his horrified eyes. "You suggested the restaurant." Kevin nodded. "I work for Marcus Thorne. I have for a long time. But last night went beyond that. Marcus just wanted you to implode professionally. When you put your hands on that girl, you stumbled into a whole different ecosystem. You see, that little restaurant is protected territory." "Protected? By who?" "That old man." Sterling scoffed, a pathetic echo of his former arrogance. "That old man," Kevin said, his voice dropping with a new kind of gravity, "is Mr. Alistair Finch. He doesn't own buildings, Rich. He owns favors. He owns loyalty. He owns the quiet spaces where men like you are not welcome. Marcus Thorne owes him a favor from years ago. So do judges, city councilmen, and the kind of people who can make a man's life unravel with a single phone call. Mr. Finch values order, and that little trattoria, with its checkered tablecloths and its quiet waitress, is a cornerstone of his particular order. You didn't just spill wine, you idiot. You took a sledgehammer to a pillar in his temple. Sterling could not speak. His world had not just collapsed. He was learning it had never been real to begin with. His greatest triumph was a stage, and he had been the lead fool in a tragedy written by his enemies. So the car, the deal, it was all consequences. Kevin finished for him. Marcus got what he wanted, a clean break. Mr. Finch got what he wanted, his sanctuary cleansed. And you? You get to be what you truly are, Rich. Nothing. Kevin turned and left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded to Sterling like a tomb being sealed. He sat there, alone in his glass box, the city sprawling beneath him, no longer his kingdom, but a monument to his epic public fall. For a long while there was only silence and the frantic thumping of his own heart. The shock gave way to a chilling clarity. They thought they had won. They thought he would crumble into nothing. But Richard Sterling was a creator of narratives, and he would not let this be his final chapter. He grabbed his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. There was one weapon left in his arsenal: public opinion. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the name: Julian Croft. Croft wasn't a journalist. He was an online arsonist, a blogger who ran a new media site that specialized in character assassination, fueled by outrage and conspiracy. He was perfect. Julian, Sterling said when the call connected, his voice a low, urgent hiss. I have a story for you that will blow the lid off this city. Corporate titans in bed with organized crime. A violent mobster terrorizing innocent business owners. Me, I'm the victim. 2 days later, in a dimly lit bar in the West Loop that smelled of stale beer and old secrets, Julian Croft sat across from a man who did not look like a violent mobster. Mr. Finch had requested the meeting. He sat with his hands folded on the table, a glass of water before him. He had listened patiently as Croft, brimming with smug confidence, laid out the story Sterling had fed him, embellishing it with his own flair for the dramatic. So you see, Mr. Finch, Croft concluded, leaning back, the cheap leather of the booth groaning under his weight. I have you. Assault, arson, extortion, witness intimidation, Sterling has it all on a platter. It's a hell of a story. My readers are going to eat it up. The clicks will be astronomical. Mr. Finch took a slow sip of water. He placed the glass down with a soft, deliberate click. It is a story, Mr. Croft. But is it the story? It's the one that's going to make my career, Croft sneered, a predator sensing a kill. Perhaps, Finch said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. Or perhaps it will be the one that ends it. You fancy yourself a hunter of dragons, a slayer of the corrupt. But you are aiming your slingshot at a shadow while the real dragon feasts in the castle behind you. Finch slid a simple manila folder across the table. It was thin, almost empty. Mr. Sterling is a loud, obnoxious fool, a symptom, not the disease. The story you should be writing is not about him. It's about Marcus Thorne. It's about why a man like Thorne would go to such elaborate lengths to orchestrate the public implosion of his top executive. Croft's smirk faltered. A flicker of professional curiosity warred with his cynical greed. He opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a series of account numbers and routing information for several offshore banks. What is this? A laundry list? That, Mr. Finch explained, is the loose thread. You pull on it, and a multi-billion-dollar company unravels. You see, the acquisition Sterling was celebrating was more than just a setup. It was a smokescreen. Thorne's company has been cooking its books for 5 years. A massive systemic fraud. The acquisition was designed to absorb a shell corporation, burying the evidence so deep no auditor would ever find it. But the SEC was starting to sniff around. Thorne grew nervous. He needed a distraction, a big, loud, messy one. Croft stared at the paper, then at Finch, his mind racing, connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a lightning rod, Finch corrected gently, someone whose downfall would be so spectacular, so gossip-worthy that it would draw all the attention. Richard Sterling, with his monumental ego, was the perfect candidate. Thorne set the stage, and Sterling performed exactly as predicted. Marcus Thorne used my assistance to remove a nuisance, but his true purpose was to conceal a far greater disruption to the order of things. I do not appreciate being used as a janitor to clean up one mess, while a larger one festers in the boardroom. Croft's journalistic instincts, long buried under layers of cynical clickbait, began to stir. This was bigger. This was real. This was a Pulitzer, not a blog post. How do I know this is true? This is just a piece of paper. The information is sound, Finch said, and you will find you have an anonymous source, a disillusioned former executive assistant named Kevin, who is prepared to corroborate everything and provide the necessary documentation. He feels quite guilty about his role in the affair and has developed a sudden, powerful urge to cooperate with the press. The trap was laid, elegant and inescapable. Croft was being offered a choice. He could run Sterling's petty revenge fantasy, a story that would generate buzz for a week before being buried in lawsuits and denials from a man with infinite resources. Or he could break the biggest corporate fraud story of the decade, a story that would make him a legend. "Why give this to me?" Croft asked, his voice now a respectful whisper. The sneer was gone, replaced by the awe of an amateur in the presence of a grandmaster. Mr. Finch's eyes were distant, looking at something beyond the walls of the bar. "Because you, Mr. Croft, are a tool, and I believe in using the right tool for the job. You are loud. You are disruptive. You are a wrecking ball." Mr. Sterling's narrative was about him. The truth is about balance. Run his story, and you will have made a powerful and very quiet enemy. Run the real story, and you will simply be a reporter doing his job. The choice is yours. The next Monday, the story broke. It was an earthquake. Croft's website, once a haven for conspiracy, was now cited by every major financial news outlet in the world. The headline wasn't about a mobster. It was, "Thorne Industries implodes amidst massive fraud revelations. SEC launches full-scale investigation." Richard Sterling's name was mentioned only once, in the 7th paragraph. The investigation was reportedly triggered by erratic behavior from disgraced former executive Richard Sterling, whose public meltdown last week at a local restaurant is now seen as the unintentional catalyst that brought the company's fraudulent practices to light. He wasn't the victim. He wasn't the villain. He was a footnote, a pathetic, irrelevant clown whose tantrum had accidentally burned down the whole circus. The public humiliation was absolute and complete. His phone rang not with offers of support, but with subpoenas. His face was splashed across news segments, not as a titan of industry, but as the fool who tripped and fell into a hornet's nest, revealing it to the world. A week later, the evening rush at Trattoria di Valerio was in full swing. The air was warm with the scent of garlic bread and simmering marinara. Bella moved through it all with a newfound ease, the deep-set weariness finally gone from her eyes. Leo's college tuition was secured in a trust, established by an anonymous benefactor. She knew, but she also knew it was a gift that required no words, only gratitude. On her break, she'd been circling course listings in a university brochure for her brother, the paper already soft with handling. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and her smile faltered for just a second. It was Richard Sterling. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. His suit was rumpled, his face was pale and unshaven, and his eyes, once burning with arrogance, were now vacant and haunted. He stumbled in, looking around the bustling room as if searching for something he had lost, a ghost returning to the scene of his own demise. He was invisible. No one noticed him. No one cared. His gaze fell on Bella, and a flicker of something, shame, rage, despair, crossed his face. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Then his eyes drifted to the corner booth. Mr. Finch was there, in his usual seat, his book open before him. He did not look up. He did not acknowledge Sterling's presence. He simply turned a page. In that small, silent gesture, Sterling understood. He had not been defeated. He had been erased. To Alistair Finch, and to the world that mattered, he no longer existed. Sterling turned and shuffled out of the restaurant, a man already buried, swallowed by the uncaring city. Bella took a deep breath, composing herself, and walked to the corner booth with a fresh espresso. She set it down quietly on its saucer. Mr. Finch looked up from his book. His winter sky eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw the barest hint of a true smile touch his lips. "Thank you, Isabella." "You're welcome, Mr. Finch," she replied, her own smile genuine and bright. A comfortable silence settled between them. She found herself lingering. "I saw the news," she said softly, "about that company, about everything." He simply nodded, his gaze returning to the page. "Was all of that?" she began, then hesitated, unsure how to phrase the enormous question. "Was all of that because of me?" Mr. Finch placed a single finger on his page to mark his spot. He looked around the warm, noisy, vibrant room, at the family laughing, at the young couple holding hands, at the rhythmic, comforting chaos of the life within those walls. "This place has a particular harmony, Isabella," he said, his voice a low hum. Mr. Sterling was a discordant note. "I simply had the orchestra remove him." He looked back at her, his eyes holding a profound, ancient calm. "You are not the reason for the harmony, but you are a vital part of it. A part I find pleasing." She finally understood. He was the city's most feared man, a silent king ruling a hidden empire. She was a waitress, building a life from the ashes of her past. In the quiet corner of an old Italian restaurant, they had formed an unlikely, unspoken alliance. She was his small piece of a decent world, a reminder of the quiet order worth protecting. And he, in turn, was her guardian. She knew now that some lives are protected not by high walls or armed guards, but by the simple, unwavering loyalty of a man who values a perfectly made cup of coffee and who will unmake worlds to ensure no one ever again disturbs the simple grace of its delivery.